What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and as promised, I'm going to do my review of the level 20 one-shot that, again, as a reminder, is available for free, Don't Say Vecna. This uses the Vecna the Archlich stat block, which was available for free for a little while. I did a video on that. It was in the Vecna dossier. However, I believe if you are a subscriber to D&D Beyond, it is a subscriber perk for the months of June and July, so I think you can still get access to it. I actually ran this adventure last night. I've seen other people complete this adventure in 2 hours. We completed it in about 5.5. Now, some of that was discussion. By the way, that video is here, and I'm going to clip out the discussion at the end and upload that separately if you want to just see the kind of post-game discussion. We had a lot of folks the folks that played in the game are content creators, DMs Guild creators, RPG creators, and had a lot of insight into their thought process as to what worked and what didn't. But I will be baking that in to this review because that's also part of the reason why I wanted to wait to do this review, because now I have run it from start to finish, and I have now insight into things I would update, things I would change, and things I liked and didn't like, what worked, what didn't. So this is your spoiler warning. If you're going to be playing Don't Say Vecna, do look away because I am going to go through this in detail. And here we go. So I will say, one, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It really does help me out. It's a small click for you guys, and it's a huge help for me. So let's go ahead and jump over to the D&D Beyond website. Now, this is a blog post. I feel like I stressed this in our stream yesterday, but this is very much, in my opinion, it's clearly not something designed by Wizards of the Coast. This is made by, as you can see here, written by Michael Galvez. I'll zoom it in here a little bit, of D&D Beyond. And it is very clear to me that this is not something written by WotC. This is something written to capitalize on the Vecna the Archlich stat block that was pretty much thank you, Elgato, for that, which was also part to capitalize on Stranger Things being released and having Vecna as the named bad guy. Again, different Vecna, but you get the point. So, it is a blog post. This isn't available if you were to go to like your sources and look at your adventures. It doesn't show up in here. It's not available in a PDF anywhere. It is literally just in this blog post. So again, I will link this in the description because if you don't know where this is, then you in theory won't be able to play it. So it does say you will need the Vecna dossier, at least from the very least, to get access to this stat block, which is what you use in the adventure. So I will tell you right up front, the start of the adventure is pretty lacking. It pretty much, the box text at the beginning of the adventure gives away the whole spiel, pretty much. Now, actually, you know what? Let me come in here and tell you this. One thing, we had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun running it. The players had a lot of fun playing it. So I want you to take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now, I'm not shitting on this adventure for the sake of doing so. I'm trying to come at this from as someone who's run, thousands of hours of games and have run things from high-produced third-party, first-party content to friends just slapdash together one-shots. So I'm coming at this with a critical eye. And again, this is basically supposed to be an establishing adventure to use this Vecna stat block. And a lot of people did have issues with the Vecna stat block. I've seen a bunch of people saying Vecna's too weak, things of that nature. Okay. I had a lot of fun using Vecna, and we'll talk about, again, the stat block and things as we get to that part of the adventure. But, excuse me, the grand scheme of the adventure, which I will just very quickly summarize for you, is a scholar wizard style tower that existed in the material plane. It's never established which material plane you're on, so you can pretty much drop this anywhere. This could be in your homebrew world, Forgotten Realms, or what have you. This tower disappears from the material plane, and the party is sent to figure out what's up with the tower. That's it. You don't get any, there's not, I think this would have benefited a lot from, an NPC who is the benefactor for your level 20 party. I guess perhaps you're going to say that the party is level 20, therefore they're world savior style characters so they would do this out of the goodness of their heart. But there are plenty of people that I've played with that were level 5 characters that wouldn't do anything out of the goodness of their heart. So let's go ahead back and take a look. All right, so here's the adventure summary. I'll zoom it in a little bit more for you guys. Takes place in a wizard tower. There are 3 scholars, Colleen, Aiden, and Brin. They were researching Vecna. Vecna, their studies caught his attention. He plane shifted the tower to Limbo, okay, where he has imprisoned them, tormented them, etc. He now uses the tower to learn and kill those who dare to learn more about him. The tower contains deadly traps, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's basically your objectives. Investigate the tower, retrieve the uncovered secrets of Vecna, find the 3 keys to open up this gate, and defeat Vecna. Very straightforward stuff. It does have depictions, I say, of body horror, torture, and dismemberment. I didn't personally find them that gruesome, but, you know, your sensibilities may vary from mine. I'm a huge horror movie buff and things like that, so these kind of things don't really bug me, and I actually kind of enjoyed it, and I really got into it when we were kind of, you know, to really sell it, and I think that I got the appropriate sort of gross out reactions from the players, but no one was, you know, put off enough to want to stop playing. But again, your mileage may vary. So I guess I'll also use this as an opportunity to say, again, aside from the spoiler warning, the potential torture, body horror, dismemberment warning as well. So there's a little bit here about character creations, right? So your characters are going to be level 20 in this. There's no pre-written characters. That is also something I feel like could have been beneficial for this one-shot if they provided you with like 4 or 5 predetermined characters, all statted up to level 20, potentially with whatever magic items and things that this adventure deems is necessary. That would be a great jumping off point, even if you didn't want to use those pre-written characters, but wanted to have the party you know, make their own characters, but you could say, here's basically the template, right? You'll have be of roughly this power level with these magic items. I think that would do a lot to kind of take this to the next level. So consider that if you're a DM's Guild creator or something like that, and you want to do that, or, you know, content creator, and you want to come up with pre-gen characters that hit a couple different archetypes, that would be pretty good. All right. So here's your character's hook. They're seasoned adventurers researching the disappearance of the Scientia Tower. They should have an interest in uncovering the secrets found in the tower. Mind you, we don't, again, what I'm reading to you now is basically what I told my players. A tower went missing. You should be interested in finding it and the secrets inside. For example, they may have a connection to one of the missing scholars or be burdened by fleeting visions of horror. This is where I think it is it's weak. I think a little bit of an intro here could have gone a long way more than this. Because basically, the start of the adventure is the box text when you're outside of the tower in Limbo. Whether this be a group, a scholarly group of whatever the realm is, a singular NPC. Again, reminder, this is a one-shot, so it's not like your characters have leveled up from 1 to 20 over the course of an adventure, and they have established relationships with a variety of different NPCs. So you can make one up, and just like that's that NPC's backstory, you know. Why did I say Jimmy Smits? I don't know. I guess maybe I'm thinking of. Well, we'll make it Jimmy Smits. Sure, why not? The NPC who gets the party all of their jobs, let's say. And he's established character, well-trusted character of the party, and he says, hey guys, listen, I have another task for you. A prominent scholarly wizard tower that was in X location randomly just blinked out of existence from the material plane. I would say, I think it benefits if you say that the tower, when removed and plane shift, maybe it left a crater where some of the ground left with the tower, so then it makes it seem like the tower just wasn't, like, there's a little bit more gravity to it, if you will. And listen, you know, these guys were doing some high-tier research on, you know, they could even come out and say, like, they were researching Vecna, right? The most powerful archlich in the history of all realms. They were doing research on him, making headway, seemingly uncovering his secrets, and then all of a sudden this tower has disappeared from existence and no one knows where it is. I need you guys to figure out where it is, And I also need you guys to get this tower. You know, they obviously must have been onto something if the tower disappeared. So I need you to go and find the tower. If you can bring it back, great. I don't know what the state that it's in, but if you can uncover their research, this could be a huge, boon to defense of our realm from Vecna if he ever decides to attain full power. Something like that, right? Give the characters a reason to go do it. Now, again, we were playing this as a one-shot, so you take a one-shot with a grain of salt, right? Your character dies at the end of the one-shot. You don't really care too much because it's a one-shot. This character's probably not coming back again. But you get the point, right? So that's I do think that would benefit it. And again, that character could set up that whole, like, ooh, it's Vecna, right? Get the characters thinking about that. Now, how the characters get to Limbo, that's another thing. Maybe there's a group of, Jimmy Smits could say, I've dispatched some of our best, arcane detectives, as it were. They're on site, analyzing the scene. Perhaps they could give you more information. And your party, you give them the last little minute. Hey, do you guys need to do anything ahead of time before we go out to this? They go to the location. The arcane detectives tell you, hey, there's a weird interplanar signature here. From our research is showing a signature of chaotic energy of Limbo. So our best guess is that the tower was transported from here to the plane of Limbo. And they're like, oh, okay, we're going to Limbo. Now the party knows about this. Then they're like, hey, Joey. Oh, yep, Joey's got a tuning fork that works to Limbo. He'll plane shift you guys there. So it's not an issue. You can get them there, but like it builds a story. Okay, so anyway. So it says magic items may be necessary to survive the encounter with Vecna. He is immune to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical attacks. So martial characters find themselves in a tricky situation. I would agree. What I gave my party was I said everybody got 2 uncommon magic items, 1 rare magic item, and then either 2 very rare magic items or 1 legendary magic item. It was their choice. Now, realistically, if you'd played a campaign from level 1 to 20, you probably would have accumulated more than that. But I didn't want to go too nuts and trivialize the entire encounter. I also told them you have whatever mundane equipment you want. And then basically I said for like consumables, spell scrolls, spell components, you're a level 20 character, you've been adventuring to this point. And I basically said, I trust you. Whatever you think you would have, I will let you have. Now, obviously, the players could have cheesed this if they really wanted to, but nobody, I didn't think, really did. Like, diamonds came up for the casting of certain healing spells, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. You can have those, not a problem. So there's that. I will say, as a sort of a spoiler ahead, if anybody has any sort of magic weapon that can shut down healing, that will extremely weaken Vecna in the final encounter. Because the Vecna stat block relies heavily on his bonus action that allows him to heal hit points to stay in the fight and be relevant. If he does not have access to that, that is going to be difficult. Or difficult for you as the DM, trivial for the players. Okay, so then we get into the Scientia Tower, which is the tower itself. There's not too much here. They say it's pretty standard. It's 100 feet tall, a 40-foot diameter circular tower, right, made of unassuming stone. Not a whole lot there. It's got 4 floors, and that's basically the 4 encounters you will deal with in this, right? You have encounter 1 when you get inside, 2, 3, 4, and that's kind of the whole thing, right? It says the scholar's research turned to the subject of the Archelaus Vecna. When he learned they were uncovering his secrets, he transported them and to Limbo along with the tower. So it says, though most believe the tower scholars to be daft at best, the tower's disappearance piqued the interest of several academic factions. The characters can learn of the tower's location from one of these factions, or perhaps have discovered it themselves. Again, this, in my opinion, this is a singular line at the end of the Scientia Tower bit. This is something that you very easily could miss, and I think this is, again, where I feel like it would benefit from it being built out a little bit more. Then, like, they could learn about it from this. I think a little more there could go a long way. All right, then we get into the tower's construction. The rooms are all 40 feet in diameter, again, because that's the size of the tower, 20 feet high. The stone walls have an AC of 17 with 90 hit points per 5-foot section and immunity to non-magical damage. If the tower is destroyed while in limbo, it begins to reconstruct itself because that is limbo. It is under the effects, this could possibly be important for you, is under the effects of a forbiddance spell. Celestial creatures that enter the tower or start their turn there take 5d10 radiant damage if anybody's going to be summoning celestial allies. The doors and walls are also protected against pass wall, gaseous form, and similar magic, so you're not sneaking and bypassing things. There also is a clever, also we noticed a lot of Harry Potter sort of symmetry in a lot of things by accident, because we were started off making some sort of jokes about things, and we noticed there was some more of that. But in a similar way to Voldemort, Sentia Tower is cursed by Vecna. Anyone that says the name Vecna takes... now, this is one that I didn't enforce fully, but it says, when a player or their character utters the name Vecna, the character takes 2d10 psychic damage, no save, and must make a DC 17 intelligence saving throw or be cursed. A creature cursed in this way cannot speak for 1d10 minutes, after which the curse ends. Each time this curse takes effect, no matter the character or player that triggered it, the damage increases by 1d10 psychic damage up to a maximum of 5d10. The damage decreases to 2d10 after 24 hours have passed without Vecna's name being spoken. A creature that whispers Vecna's name is not affected by the curse. As long as the remains of the scholar are in the tower, the curse cannot be ended. A couple things to take away there. One, if you haven't completed and the scholars and the remains of the scholars are in the tower, the curse cannot be ended. That means things like Greater Restoration or the like cannot work here. The psychic damage does increase. Now, I thought it was a little, especially because we're talking about Vecna, the adventure's name, Don't Say Vecna. It says whenever a player or their character utters the name Vecna, their character is supposed to take psychic damage. Now, I don't know if this is supposed to be some weird Vecna fourth wall breaking ability, but like, if the character is just like, yeah, we know we're probably going to have to fight Vecna, they're not talking in character, they're just having conversations about, Vecna. But apparently if they literally say the name Vecna, you're supposed to impact damage to their character. And that seems a little ridiculous to me, that if anybody says it. I guess if you kind of set that up early on, when someone says Vecna, you're like, okay, cool, you take 2d10 psychic damage and make an intelligence saving throw. To not be able to speak for a d10 minutes. Because, realistically, you can already kind of tell from this that the final encounter is with Vecna. If there are multiple enemies on the field, and the party member says, okay, you know what, I'm going to use my halberd and I'm going to attack Vecna. Okay, you're literally giving me a combat direction, but saying his name in combat as a player inflicts damage onto your character, and your character then might also have the inability to speak for a d10 minutes determined during the fight by just telling the DM where you're targeting. So I kept it with when only Vecna was said in character. And I think, depending on the group, it's pretty easy to distinguish that. And for me, it only happened twice over the course of the entire, 5-hour stream. And it was at pretty interesting times. So I think I would keep it to just characters only, but I didn't realize that it was supposed to increase in psychic damage each time it's said. Anyway, so we move on, and it says he's the most powerful lich in the world. He's an evil spellcaster. Tales of Vecna's Act have existed in D&D lore since the first edition. In a multiverse full of beings, Vecna is the worst of them. More details are found on the Vecna dossier. So then we get into the adventure start. Okay. Now, like I said, I feel like you might have wanted to intro this, because if you don't and you just roll right into the box text, it explains all of it up front, right? Limbo is a realm of unfettered chaos. Water turns to stone, which blooms into roses that wither and ignite. Here, islands float in the endless sky, and stars are born or remade and remade in the blink of an eye. This is where you find the lost Sentia Tower, a wizard tower that was plucked out of the material plane when its scholars drew the ire of Vecna, the Undying King. Whether by miracle or impossible magic, the tower has remained intact, though its windows and front doors have been sealed with black tentacles. Now, like I said, I ended up having this sort of crater concept of where it left to show that the ground underneath it was also sort of there beneath the tower to kind of give them a little bit of more of a visual aid. I will also say that this adventure has no maps at all, which I do think further sets it in the class of this is a blog post and not an adventure. However, I was emailed by this creator here over on Reddit who actually made maps of the entirety of all of the different encounters, which is huge, because a lot of the issues you may have dealing with this adventure from your party having questions about how things are laid out or something similar are all answered by having maps. So we can see we have the variety of the different maps showcasing things here. And I think that this is all exceptionally useful if you have the maps here. So let's get back to the adventure. So, right, Limbo has no gravity. Characters can freely explore the tower's exterior. The tentacles are magical and prevent objects and creatures inside the tower from being subject to Limbo's destructive influence. So what that means is each minute that the characters are outside, just in Limbo, they must make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or take 3d10 damage of a randomly selected type or half on a success. I actually didn't realize this part either. A creature damaged in this way also must select one non-magical item at random from their inventory. This item is transmogrified into a useless form. I'm bummed that I just stopped at the first part of the damage, because this would have been hilarious to just mess around and turn this into random stuff. But what I did make sure I did with this is had each time one of the party members took damage, I had them take different damage to just showcase that it was weird. Like, you take acid, you take bludgeoning, you take radiant, you take necrotic, whatever. Just jumped all around with the different damage types. I think my party only was impacted by the chaos of Limbo twice before they actually made their way inside the tower. So I only had that come up, but it would have been funny to just like, hey, you know, your I don't know, your whetstone turns into a stuffed animal, you know, whatever. Okay, and then it says basically you find your way in the tower. You can go all around. Now, it doesn't really also tell you. It says that when you're within 5 feet of a door or a window, you have to make a saving throw or the tentacles will try to pull you in. And what they basically do is pull you into the tower. You get like kind of pulled through space. You take 46 acid damage and are pulled through the mass of slithering appendages, and then you arrive inside the tower in Area 1. Now here's the thing, right? You could shoot the tentacles, cut/destroy the tentacles, and then enter into the tower. The problem is it doesn't give you a layout of where windows are. You have, it says windows, its windows and front door have been sealed by black tentacles. We don't know how many windows there are. We're not really sure. I don't think it tells us up in the Cynthia Tower description, right? That is made of unassuming gray stone. It's home to these scholars. It's Spartan in decoration. Bare stone walls and floors. The color of the research. It doesn't really tell us. The first floor is the entrance to the tower. It tells us that the second floor is where they live. There's a library and botanical gardens. The third and fourth floors were a lab and observatory. So I just said that there were windows on the first floor, when realistically it's a tower. You'd probably have windows on every floor. And I get that if you get too close to the tentacles, they pull you inside and transport you into the entrance. But I just kept the windows down on the first floor so that I wouldn't have to deal with the party going into a second floor or splitting the party, so that they could start at the bottom and work their way up. But yeah, you can damage them. They have 30 hit points. It automatically fails Dex saving throw. Tentacles brought to 0 right away, exposing a door or a window that can be used to access the tower. And they can be locked and opened easily, and then you can get inside. If you wait too long, though, after a D6 minutes, the tentacles will regrow. So that's pretty much the outside of the tower. You want to also possibly do more than just this description to kind of give and sell to your players that they are in Limbo, that weird stuff is just happening. And then once they get inside to the tower entrance, you have, you're in a completely pitch black room. Once you enter into the tower, you are now no longer exposed to the effects of Limbo. It says this room is pitch black except for 2 lights, one that shines on the front door, which is the one they more than likely came in, and one shines on a door across the room. They have no distinguishable source. There's just light there, right? It says with the exception of a 5-foot radius in the front of the room's 2 doors, the tower's entrance is blanketed in magical darkness. Dark vision can't see through it. Magical light can't illuminate it. If a spell that creates light is cast while in the room, it is automatically dispelled unless it is a 6th level or higher. And it says if the darkness is dispelled, the party can see that the room is full of crates. Looking through the crates reveals nothing of interest beyond old books written in a variety of languages. Now, it says here specifically that the magical darkness can be dispelled with a 6th level or higher light spell of some kind. I let my party use a 6th level or higher Dispel Magic to remove the magical darkness. It doesn't specifically state that you can do it, but I feel like that makes sense because they tried first to dispel it with a 3rd level Dispel Magic, and then they cast it a second time, and then they rolled high enough to dispel it. The main kind of feature in this is a Bone Devil, which dwells in the entrance. He doesn't have a wings or flying speed, but he does climb on the walls. And basically, he is not impeded by magical darkness. So in his best move, he will attack the party from magical darkness, having advantage on all of his attacks. And a Bone Devil's Stinger can do some pretty serious damage. And basically, the party came in, and then very shortly after, they dispelled the magic of the darkness. So now he's kind of out and exposed in the open. And the party basically did battle with him and won. Then when he dies, he turns into a hand. It's Kelleen's hand, the female sort of scholar, turns into her hand. And then you can see there's a door at the other side of the room. And then one of my party members tried to open that door. When he touched the handle, you take 46 necrotic damage, no save. And they must make a Constitution saving throw or have their max hit points reduced by the damage they took. And it lasts until they take a long rest. So the trick is you use the dismembered hand that you found that was once the Bone Devil, which happens to be a left hand as well, which is Vecna, symbolism, to grab the door and open it, and that allows you to open it. Now, it also says, we have this little bit about her demise. It says, days after trapping the scholars in Limbo, Vecna transformed Brin, one of them, into an abomination that attacked Kelleen and Aiden. Fearing for her life, Kelleen attempted to escape the tower. She managed to make it to the front door before she was dragged back in by Brin. In the subsequent struggle, Kelleen's left hand was torn off, suffused by dark energies of the tower, and mutated into a Bone Devil. There's no way for the party to know that, at least as it's written. You would just never know. That's for you as the DM. Perhaps having a vision when someone picks up the hand or something. I guess you might not want to give away the attack. Maybe you do kind of like an Evil Dead where you don't see who's causing the attack, but you see her running from her perspective, trying to get to the door, and then the hand gets severed. The vision goes, you watch as the hand starts to turn into a Bone Devil and the vision goes dark. That would be a cool idea to sort of give the imagery of that, rather. Because again, there's no way for the party to know. Now, this was an issue in my playthrough because I missed a singular line right, where is it? Right here, okay? So it says a Bone Devil's here. It says it's on the opposite door that grants a stat. Then it says a character that approaches within 5 feet of the door, it attacks them. And then it talks more about the Bone Devil. This line is exceptionally important. The door opposite of the tower entrance leads to a staircase that grants access to the upper floors. That's all you have access to, right? Again, this is where a map would be exceptionally beneficial. And it is sort of referenced here in the maps that I show you. You can see there is a staircase, and it is a spiral staircase that continues as you go up and up and up. And that is important because I couldn't for the life of me, by reading through it, determine that this was a central tower. I just thought it was a staircase that went up, and then maybe there was going to be another staircase in the next room. And again, maybe that was on me for just not thinking of traditional tower construction, but it's a singular line here that if you miss, because when you go and read into the next couple of sections, there's nothing about the staircase going, how they get up to the next floor, because it's covered in this one line here. Again, you might have read that and then it might have stuck in your mind. It just didn't in mine when I read through things and was running it in the heat of actually running the campaign or the one-shot. So that's where I think the maps are hugely beneficial, because a lot of the questions that everybody had in the layout and the way things work was all immediately answered if you had a map. Now, these maps would also make it super easy to do this one-shot with Roll20 or something like that. I didn't use Roll20 because there's no maps to use, so we were just doing all Theater of the Mind. And I think for the most part, it worked. The only instance it didn't was in the major fight against Vecna, where there was a little bit of positioning questioning, but that's bound to happen occasionally with Theater of the Mind. So you defeat the Bone Devil, you get the hand. I like the Bone Devil. It's a good starter thing. If you're unfamiliar with a Bone Devil stat block, we can take a quick look at it here. It has immunity to fire and poison damage. That was a little bit of a sticking point for my party, as one of them was based all around fire, did a lightning bolt that he turned into fire, and it did no damage. Has a bunch of other resistances, and like I said, its sting does quite a bit of damage, 2d8 plus 4 piercing, and then 5d6 poison damage. And if you fail the Constitution saving throw, they become poisoned for a minute, which again, during the course of the encounter, it can do, again, 1 sting and 2 claws. If they don't get rid of the magical darkness, this guy will be an absolute terror because all of these attacks will be made at advantage and all of the party's attacks will be made at disadvantage, not being able to see it. And having a 19 AC is also nothing to sneeze at, but again, your party is level 20, so they stand a pretty good chance to overcome a Bone Devil's AC. But a good starter encounter to set a little bit of the danger that they can expect, soften them up a little bit before they move on to the next area. So this is the living quarters, and we'll take a look at this here. Here are the living quarters, right? Now, it says, ascending the stairs, you come into a living space that's much larger than the previous floor. Plain wooden furniture is strewn around the common area between 2 wooden doors. Beyond the common area is a small disorganized library with bookcases that reach the ceiling. Dead leaves are scattered on the floor of the library. So if we look at what was made here, you can see that there's a common area here that extends into a kind of cramped library. And then you have 2 sort of chambers for the various people, the scholars. But let's keep going. So the first room is the room that you see here, which is sort of the 2-person bed, a larger bed. And it says this is Colleen and Aiden's room. Simple room, has a candle with its burned down to a nub, and there's a bottle of ink that's spilled all over notes on the desk. And that's important because it says if you do inspect the bed, you'll find an eyeball in the bed, which will immediately turn and look at you, and then you are given a vision. It says, when this happens, you see a vision of Colleen and Aiden talking about the inscriptions found on the cruel gate. Colleen suggests that the inscriptions must hold clues to unlocking it. She then wonders aloud about Brin, saying that he has not left the laboratory in some time. Again, I think this would also have been beneficial in box text form rather than just in kind of, you come up with it. This could have been a good opportunity for some more box text to spell out exactly how it is, what the mannerisms and things are. Maybe she could even say Aiden, blah, blah, blah. And then Aiden could say Colleen. That's not the case. Because like I said, as far as I can tell, there's no way you ever learn Colleen's name. Not that it's necessarily important, but that's the thing. I also I gave her a scar on one of her fingers on her left hand that was noticeable in the vision, so that when you look at the dead hand that you picked up, you can see it's the same scar. It's like, oh, it's her hand. I'm just going to give you that, right? And then you need to make an intelligence saving throw after it, or take psychic damage and lose sight in your left eye. My artificer was the one who picked it up, so his intelligence saving throw was actually pretty good, so there was no issue there. But it does give them disadvantage on perception checks, and at the end of their long rest, they can make another save. You could also heal it with greater restoration or something similar. And then it also, you'll see throughout here, it says, Colleen's hand and Aiden's eye can be used on the cruel gate. We'll get to that in the final encounter. And then if you read the journal, it says, Aiden no longer sleeps in our bed. Each night he roams around the tower reading books, but more often than not he goes to the observatory and stares at the black gate on the far wall. It appeared just a few days ago, but we can't divine any information on it. I convinced him to retire to bed, and he was racked by a pain behind his left eye throughout the night. Now he sleeps fitfully during the day. He says that night is the time to uncover secrets. So my party actually read the notes first and then searched the bed after finding the eyeball. The other chamber is Brin's chamber. That's this one right here. It doesn't have a whole lot here, right? There's, again, I like that their bed, their chambers, has box text describing it. Brin's chambers does not. Again, I feel like if you're going to do consistency would be key here. Again, so tucked against the wall is just a simple room of a pair of newly shined shoes, a quill that rests in an ink pot, and there's 2 books open. One's old, one's new. And then it says scribe work. It says once the cruel gate appeared, Brin was overwhelmed by his loneliness and felt an insistent need to polish his shoes and translate old books into common. The book that he was translating before he was transformed by Vecna, which we'll get to in a minute, appears to be about a figure of myth who had a golden eye and a withered hand. It was said that anything this figure wished for came true. The figure met an untimely demise when a thief stole the eye from their head while they slept. Again, another opportunity for box text to describe exactly how it was written from the perspective of Brin's translation. I think that would have been, I know it's a little bit extra work, and you can obviously do what I just did and describe it, but again, I think it would help sell it as more of a traditional and like higher quality one-shot. All right, so when we move out of the 2 rooms, down here into the library. So cramped shelves are packed with old rotting tomes, newly bound books, loose sheets of parchment, and tightly wound scrolls. 3 chairs surround a table that is covered with various documents. Dried leaves cover the floor and appear to be blown in from a half-closed door to the right of the bookshelves. Now, I don't see the... oh, this is the half-closed door. Okay, I didn't see it at first, but this is it right here. So there's a door there. And basically, this is a really interesting... This is how you get your exposition dump for Vecna, but this is also interesting, right? So it says, if a creature starts reading any of the books, they must make an DC 18 Wisdom saving throw or suffer the Gias spell, and their magical command is to do nothing but sit and read. If the command is not adhered to, they take 5d10 psychic damage, become incapacitated, and they praise Vecna. Again, presumably saying praise Vecna, they would then trigger the Don't Say Vecna thing and take the damage and stuff. This effect ends if the creature takes any damage, right? So even if they take damage from this, it ends immediately. And then if they spend at least 1 hour reading, they learn the following bits about Vecna. They learn a little about his history. He never knew his father. His mother was exiled for dark magic. He was bound into servitude. He massacred the wizards that did so. He forged an empire. He's turned to dark powers to become a lich. He was betrayed. This is by Cass, but Cass isn't mentioned. And that caused him to lose his eye in his hand. And then he travels the multiverse and nobody knows why. Now, I did actually have a player pick up a book, read it, and fail the wisdom saving throw. So they were affected by the Gias spell to sit there and read the book and do nothing but sit and read. This takes a little... This will be, on you as the DM. Can they communicate? It says do nothing but sit and read. If the party says, hey, what you doing? And they're like reading or like talking about stuff. Or do they just just looking at the book? Can they still converse as long as they're still reading? My player who was doing it played it off and was just like spouting off Vecna fun facts that he made up. Like Vecna's middle name is Steve. And he has a brother that he doesn't really talk about. And his mother didn't like him because of this reason. It was just like spouting off facts. Because they were trying to gauge, does this look out of place for him to sort of just be sitting there and reading? Or do we think he's under the effects of a spell? They said they used detect magic. I saw that it said it was under the effect of a spell. I think that's how, or maybe they didn't use it. I forget how they did it, but they cured him with greater restoration, I believe, of the Gias spell and broke him out of it. But it says nothing. It says sit and read, so you can't really pick them up and move them or have them walk and read. They're supposed to sit down and read. So you just have to figure out how you want to interpret that, because if they're still trying to sit and read, and the party members are trying to move them, they're still adhering to the command, therefore not taking the damage. So you have to just figure out how you want to handle that and what you want to do. Do they have a noticeable tonal shift? I guess if this is a character that is not a book reader or that, and then all of a sudden they sit down and are super focused on the book, that could be an indication. But these characters are mostly developed for this one shot, more than likely. So you don't necessarily know if that's out of character, because you only know the character for one encounter, really, depending on how this works out. But either way, it's good to get the exposition dump out of there, and also interesting to have this I thought was a very interesting spell. Then the sort of closed door here leads to this area, which is a botanical garden, right? So it's bleak and desolate. It's kind of all dead. You can see there's this big tree in the middle. 40 foot in diameter, 40 feet high, clearly an extra dimensional space of some kind. A creature that first steps into the room hears a voice of someone dead that they loved. They must make a charisma saving throw or be compelled to approach this tree. And if they get within 5 feet of it, they must succeed on a DC 15 strength save, or the branches will try to restrain them. And then, again, if they're restrained by the tree, they take necrotic damage at the beginning of their turn, and 1d4 ghouls crawl their way up out of the garden beds. Now, none of my players sustained any of the damage or were restrained by the tree, so the ghouls technically never came out. However, 4 wraiths wearing tattered wizard's robes lie in wait, so the second a creature gets within 5 feet of the tree, the wraiths pop out, and they try to use their life drain ability on anybody. So the thing is, the wraiths, we'll pull up the wraith stat block here, their life drain reduces, if they fail the con save, it reduces the maximum hit points. I didn't have them use Create Spectre because that would just, complicate the encounter. I rolled, it's 4 wraiths, so We had one party member get compelled, make their way in, but they were able to break the strength saving throw of the branches, so they, again, didn't trigger the ghouls, but that put them right next to the tree, which triggers the wraiths. And it also has here blight. No plant can live in the courtyard. Any attempt to bring plant life back to life automatically fails. Any creature with the plant subtype takes 5d10 necrotic damage at the start of each of its turn. So what I had done, because I missed, as I said, that bit about the sort of spiral staircase at the start, I had the staircase or the door out on the other side of the tree, so you had to go through the room, which realistically, there's nothing in this room. There is no reason to go in this room. The main thing you need to do on the second floor is get the eyeball, realistically. And we'll talk, you don't necessarily need to do that, but that's your biggest takeaway, is the eyeball and any of the research that you're able to get done to provide exposition about who Vecna is. But the botanical gardens, absolutely no reason to actually go in there other than to investigate, but I forced the party to go in there by having the door be on the other side. So the third floor will take you to the laboratory that we can see right here. So it says, steps ascend to a humid room with abandoned lab equipment that grows with sickly green light. A decapitated body lies shackled to an upright operating table. We can see that right here. Above the ceiling is covered in a pulsating flesh from which limbs and other body parts hang. Now, this is probably my favorite part of the entire adventure. I think it actually beats out the Vecna fight, personally, because of the exceptionally unique mechanics covered in this encounter. So this is Brin. Brin is the remaining character that was the remaining scholar, was transformed into this mass of roiling flesh by Vecna, right? So transform him into this thing, and he hunts and consumes the bodies of fellow scholars. He now consists of 3 individual masses connected to Brin's head. So the decapitated head is not on the body is on the pulsating mass of flesh. In combat, Brin, this is the cool part, uses the statistics of 3 shambling mounds with the following changes. Brin is undead and not a plant. The 3 masses all share the same initiative. They can climb difficult surfaces, including upside down on ceilings, without having to make an ability check. And if his head is somehow severed from the masses, such as by a vorpal sword, the 3 masses die immediately. And then when he detects characters, the fleshy tendrils comes out and he says, "Come join me in Vecna's name. Enjoy eternal embrace." So I really like this encounter because basically you have 3 shambling mounds. They all go at the exact same time. So it's not like you're not tripling the hit points of one shambling mound. You're basically running 3 of them together, but they are all one singular mass. So you're essentially getting to do, acting on the same initiative count, 6 slam attacks a turn. And if you hit with both slam attacks, the target is grappled, and they use engulf on them, where they sort of, a shambling mound. People know this. You can see the guy here being engulfed by the shambling mound. As such, they're blinded, restrained, unable to breathe, and they must make a con save at the start of each of their turns as it kind of like crunches them up, and if it moves, they move with it. The cool thing about shambling mounds is they're they're resistant to cold and fire damage and immune to lightning damage, but they also have this deal where they are lightning damage. When they're subjected to lightning damage, it actually heals them the amount of damage that they took. Now, I think I did misstep in the encounter and had it be immune to fire instead of resistant to fire. I don't remember if that's what I did, but I actually kind of like that. It worked out better in the long run. But what I actually had happen was one of the players cast a lightning bolt of a very high level slot on the shambling mound and healed it for like 40 something hit points. And yeah, I think this encounter is fantastic. I also had the head not be immediately visible from the mound of flesh. When it dropped down, I had the sort of flesh separate, and then you could see the head when it talked to them. I also made a point to tell them that as they were damaging the head, it was, it was making audible noises and showing grimace on its face as it was taking damage, and it was making faces and complaining about how it hurts and things like that as they're attacking it, because the human head can talk. And what I had happen as they continued to do damage to it and killed basically one of the parts of the shambling mound, I had a section of that flesh essentially die, and then it's kind of just dragging around this dead weight as it's making its attacks. And I actually did have our barbarian get subsumed I didn't call it Engulf because I thought Engulf would kind of maybe give away if people are familiar with Shambling Mounds. I called it Subsuming. It grabbed the Barbarian and he was sucked inside the thing. So I had to turn in there. It was pretty interesting. We had one of the characters dive inside the thing, look around for him, grab him dimension door out to safety, and then it grabbed him and sucked him right back in. And then I think cleverly, one of my party members used Reduce on it to shrink its size, and I said that because of the size had been reduced of it, that it basically expelled the Barbarian who was trapped inside. So if we go ahead and we don't need to separate that out, you have his head lies behind, right? He has no eyes or left hands, and therefore he's the remaining key for the Cruel Gate. There is notes on the desk, though, and it is kind of helps to sell. I actually had them read, I think, or maybe I had them read it after. But either way, it says, I've spent my years in solitude researching all the cruel things that threaten my realm to protect the people I love. But Vecna is not one of those cruel things. He promises life and eternity of it, if only we lend ourselves to his wisdom. For my servitude, he has promised a great gift, a way for everyone I love to be together. So great is this gift that I shall take all of the realm into my warm embrace. Imagine a world that is one, a world that is me, which explains the sort of cruel torture of Vecna, making him a mass of a bunch of different flesh. But what's interesting is if you read these notes, it casts a 9th level Dominate Monster spell on you, which is one of the spells in Vecna's stat blocks that he can do once a day. This counts as that casting, but basically what it is, they have to make a DC 22 Wisdom saving throw. If a creature is controlled in this way, Vecna doesn't change the mannerisms of the creature until they reach his sanctum, which is the final encounter, at which point the dominated creature turns against the party. As long as this is happening, Vecna is concentrating on the spell. So it says it's best to discuss the effects of the failed save with a player in private, so they can roleplay it, whether the character fails or succeeds. This counts as once per day casting of Dominate Monster from his stat block, which I think is really, really cool. Like, that triggers it, and then I was going to message one of my players privately if they failed to say, like, hey, as soon as things, you get into Vecna's sanctum and things are starting to go into combat, you have to turn on the party. Now, again, there are ways you can break it, dispel magic, possibly, taking damage. You don't get to make another save against Dominate Monster, and it's at 9th level. I think it's like a 30-day duration. But again, it does make Vecna concentrate on it, so if you're able to do a lot of damage to him, you can knock people out of the concentration. And that takes us to basically the final floor, which we can jump back to our image here of the laboratory. Or sorry, not the laboratory. We did the laboratory. This is the observatory, which is this guy right here. The floor of this room is covered in black tentacles that slither in pools of fresh blood. The ceiling is domed window that looks like an endless expanse of limbo. On the far wall, tentacles frame a black circular gate made of barbed pitch black metal, which you can see right here. You come up the stairs, here you are to this thing. In this it says, a creature that's missing hit points that enters the room must make a dexterity saving throw or take 2d10 piercing damage and be poisoned for an hour. That says creatures can repeat the saving throw each minute. Now, my party used the opportunity before they went to the observatory to take a short rest. They all rolled hit dice, so they healed up. There is nothing in here that says you can't take a short rest, especially if the things in the previous rooms have been dealt with. Perhaps you want to have some sort of mechanic. If you don't want them to be able to do that, you need to think of something that will stop or something that will trigger if they spend too long inside. But essentially, they get to the Cruel Gate, 10 feet in diameter. And then if you look at it, it has basically engravings on the thing. And you can see the first one is a man in wizard robes raising his hands before a tall tower while other men and women bow. The second shows a man sitting in a ritual circle drinking from a goblet. And the third shows a withered undead spellcaster battling a figure in full plate who wields an ornate longsword. Touching it physically causes damage, and a creature that makes a DC 11, this is a very low investigation check, but I think it's probably pretty noticeable, is that the wizard in the first scene is missing its head. The creature in the first scene is missing his head. The wizard in the second one is missing his left eye, and the undead creature in the third is missing his left hand. It says the gate's indestructible, cannot be opened, cannot be removed, cannot be moved. Removing or damaging the wall around the gate exposes the tower to the outside. To open it, you basically need to present it with a left eye, a left hand, and a head. If they've been collecting body parts as they've gone, they'll have them. Each must come from a separate humanoid, whether alive or dead, or from Brin's body. When the keys are presented, they vanish from their hands and they reappear on the creatures inside the embossments on there. And then it says if you use your own left eye or hand as a key, you permanently lose it and have disadvantage on saving throws against spells made by Vecna. A creature that uses its own head obviously cannot be resurrected because this is a magical thing and only a wish or divine intervention can bring them back. Now it says bypassing the locks. I didn't really feel like should be locks on there, but they can try. It's a DC 30 Dex check. On a failure, the creature picking the lock must make a DC 19 Dex save or be restrained, and then become trapped in the complex gears of the gate. A character trapped by the gate can escape with a DC 19 Strength or Dex save. On a failure, they take 10d10 bludgeoning damage, are ground up by the gate's gears. A character's escape attempt automatically succeeds if they offer a left eye, left hand, or head. I thought it would be more interesting to trap them inside the embossments in there, but having them be ground up and take 55 damage isn't bad either. Then, if you complete that, it teleports you to Vecna's Sanctum, which is this guy. If we see the full image, here you go. You're coming in here, and this is what you see. Broken pews. It's basically like a church, and there are a variety of zombie walls, which we'll talk about. So, it says the Cruel Gate is unlocked. Your Pulse of Necrotic Energy, which is interesting, right? Dispels all spells of 6th level or lower cast on creatures within 30 feet of the door. So everybody gets any 6th level or lower buffs. The party had Aid at 5th level cast on them that gets immediately dispelled. And then it takes you to the Sanctum, but there are things you need to know, right? It's 80 feet long, 30 feet wide, as was shown on the map. Ceilings are 60 feet high. As shown here along the walls as well. The walls are made of a mixture of zombie and stones. Zombies are melded into the stone. Any creature that comes within 5 feet of the walls must make a DC 15 Dex save or be grappled by the zombies. Any creature that starts its turn grappled by the zombies gains 1 point of exhaustion, which is huge because you can continue to build it up if they're unable to break out. A creature can repeat the saving throw as an action on each of its turns. The only downside is Vecna doesn't really have, I don't think, anything that really allows him to push people. If you had some sort of thing where you could push someone into the wall, that would be a cool visual, or like knock someone into the wall and then the zombies grab them. But as it stands, he doesn't really have anything that lets him do that. Let's see. It's warded against living creatures. Spells that heal in here only heal half hit points, regardless of what they are. It's also under the Forbiddance spell, so celestial creatures take 5d10 damage, and is unaffected by Limbo. So it talks a little bit here about rolling initiative. It says, the black gate opens into a desecrated temple. Ash blankets the floor. On the far side of the temple, standing atop a set of stairs, is a corpse decorated in tattered purple robes and ornate gold breastplate. Inside his chest is a gold and red book. He's missing his left eye and his left hand. He is Vecna, and he says, basically, I'm going to kill you. So it says when combat begins, each room in the tower erupts in green necrotic flames. A creature in the tower must make a DC 15 Dexterity saving throw or take 46 necrotic damage. And then, that just happens. That's just an intro. Fire hits them. Nothing too crazy. Then this is where things are. I highly am going to recommend what you do here. It says Vecna's combat tactics. He can ascertain the capabilities of spellcasters and identify spells they cast without making an ability check. He will try to disable or kill characters in the group he suspects has magic that can restore hit points or revive others. Additionally, if a character is missing a left eye or left hand, he's going to target them because they'll have disadvantage on his saves as well, suspecting the missing parts were offered to the Cruel Gate. For a more difficult combat, draw upon the raw power of the Book of Vile Darkness or use the following lair actions. You 100% need to use these lair actions. I'm going to say that's not even an option. If you want this combat to be interesting in any way whatsoever, these lair actions need to be a part of the combat. At the very least, and possibly even the Book of Vile Darkness as well. Now, I did end up using the Book of Vile Darkness to a degree, but I didn't end up using all of it. I just kind of pick and chose. According to this, Vecna basically wrote it. So I gave him this, where I increased one of his ability scores by 2. I chose to increase his intelligence, as that's what drives all of his DCs. And then again, a lot of this later stuff isn't super important, but it does give you the major and minor beneficial properties. So 3 minor beneficial properties and 1 major beneficial property. I chose to ignore the detrimental properties of it, just because I feel like if you write it, you get to choose that kind of stuff. So if we take a look, now the beneficial properties, there's nothing too crazy here, right? Proficiency in a skill. You could have possibly given him resistance to another damage type if you wanted. Again, I would probably recommend something like fire because it's a pretty common damage type. I feel like the rest of these aren't super, or +1 to his AC, possibly, not a bad one. And then as far as the beneficial ones, you could basically do any of these. Healing a d6 hit points at the start of his turn could be really annoying. Does an extra d6 damage. He does fight with a weapon, so that could be part of it. But I ended up just giving him another increase, so I actually bumped his intelligence score up from 22 to 26, making this a +8, increasing the DC of all of his abilities by 2. And then again, as far as the lair action goes, now Mournful Dead, this last one here, is okay, right? It's centered on a point, 20-foot radius. Each creature must make a wisdom saving throw or take 8d6 cold damage and have their movement reduced. That's probably the weakest. Now, he does have Enervation that he casts at 7th level. He doesn't need to concentrate on it, and it ends on initiative count 20 on the next round. Now, again, Enervation just shoots out to a target within 60 feet. Again, he's casting it at 7th level, so it's going to do an additional 2d8 damage. So it says the creature must make a dexterity saving throw. On a successful save, they're going to take 2d8 necrotic damage. But that's actually going to go up because it's going to go up by 2d8, so it's going to be 4d8 necrotic damage, and the spell ends. And then it says on a failed save, they're going to take, at this point, it would be 8. I'm sorry, it should be 3d. I misspoke. This should be 3d8 because this will go up by 2 to 6d8, so it's going to be half. So on a failed save, the target takes 6d8 necrotic damage, and until the spell ends, you can use your action on each of your turns to automatically deal 4d8 necrotic damage to the target. The spell ends if you use your action to do anything else. The target is ever outside the spell's range or it has total cover. And then when it deals damage to the target, you regain hit points equal to half the amount of necrotic damage. Now, having reread Enervation for the first time in a long time, I didn't actually read it fully through because every time my party members saved on it, so they only took just their initial damage, nothing subsequent. But in theory, it sounds like, oh, that's a pretty good deal. I can just drain them for an action, but it'd be better off to use your action elsewhere. So I'm actually going to pivot and say that actually Drain Life is actually the useless one. Mournful Dead at least is some AoE damage and possible battlefield control, so that's pretty good. And you absolutely want to use this one. Shadow Play. Vecna summons 1 shadow per character. Each shadow appears within 5 feet of a different character. They follow Vecna's commands and last until he uses his lair action, this particular lair action again, or until he dies. A shadow acts during initiative count 20 after lair actions have been resolved. So he summons, if you have a party, I have 4 party members, he summoned 4 shadows, right? The shadows are attacking, they go now, they attack the party, and they stay there until he uses this one again, in which those would dissolve, and you'd summon new shadows that would have revived, full hit points. And again, if the party moved or killed one of the shadows, you'll have more of them right next to the party. This changes the combat immensely, and I didn't choose to use this till about halfway through the combat, and everything changed massively. In the first turn, because the barbarian ended up moving away at one point, I knocked the barbarian's strength down by 7, and I had taken the bard's initial strength, which was 8, and knocked it down to 4 in one hit. So depending on what kind of characters you have, strength could be, you could be lessening some of their abilities by reducing their strength, or possibly taking them out completely if they're pretty weak. So I think that this is cool. I didn't do it in the time, but I think it would be a really cool role play sort of description if Vecna rips their shadow off of them and turns it into this creature. So they're basically fighting a shadow version of themselves that looks like them, maybe even has like their weapons and things, but it's essentially just a shadow character, but it has the visage of the player character. And if might have a barbarian that used the halberd, right? So if he, instead of just the life drain touch or whatever the shadow does, it would hit him with the halberd. So you can see here, they don't have a lot of hit points. They do have vulnerability to radiant. They have a handful of damage resistances and a couple immunities, but strength drain does 2d6 necrotic damage, and it reduces their strength score by a d4. It lasts until they finish a short or long rest, and if they die from this, they get raised as a shadow in a D4 hours. However, one thing to consider is, where is it? They could use Greater Restoration to remove this here, the short or long rest, that basically to return the strength score to normal, which is what ended up happening at one point. So I think that that is a huge move. You absolutely need to do that because that will be critical for the party to change things up so they don't get to just wail on Vecna. I've seen a ton of comments on my previous video about the Vecna dossier and on the live stream where the people were telling me that their party nuked Vecna in one round, which I will remind you that Vecna only has 272 hit points. Now, for some of you, that may seem like a lot, but if you have something like a rogue and a paladin in the party where they can fish for crits and do a ton of damage, you can really chunk that down by a lot. Even with like a fighter with Great Weapon Master and 4 attacks a turn with Action Surge, you could be doing 8 attacks with, and if you roll well with that, you could be doing 8 attacks, and then each one of those, that could be a minimum 80 points of damage if you hit with Great Weapon Master on all of them. Also, Vecna doesn't have shield. So Vecna doesn't have the ability to increase his armor class. Now, he does have some teleportation abilities where when he takes damage, he can teleport away, which would probably be your best move when you're hit, teleport away to put distance. But if the person still has movement speed, they can close that distance again and then just continue to wail on Vecna. So consider that. I also like in here, they also provided, with the image, some stuff that could possibly give Vecna some options for cover, because that would also be crucial because, again, Vecna doesn't have the ability to fly at all. He has the ability to cast fly, but then he needs to concentrate on it. And again, you are not under the effects of limbo in here, so no one gets to just float around if they want to. Okay. So that's then basically after that, it just basically goes into defeating Vecna, right? What happens if you kill Vecna, what he has to say. You can retrieve the Book of Vile Darkness from his remains. He'll be he'll be revived in a D100 years, and it gives you a little bit of options. Basically, you blink back into the material plane. All is well, you did the thing. So let's talk a little bit more about Vecna, because like I said, you're going to want to use the shadows. They're going to change the battle. They're going to give the players, even though shadows, like I said, only have a tiny bit of hit points, 16 hit points, right? And a vulnerability to radiant damage, right? Someone could, they also have sunlight weakness. So if someone has a sunblade or, maybe casts a sunburst or sunbeam, things like that will really do a good job of hampering these things. But this damage, even though it's only a little bit of necrotic damage, this strength drain is the huge factor that will change the battle. Because people might not be afraid of a shadow, but once they see their strength score get dropped, that can change things fundamentally. So I would definitely say that you want to use the shadows. Now let's take a look at his stat block and how you could possibly spice things up. We talked a little bit about the Book of Vile Darkness and what you may be able to do with that. Like I said, I increased his intelligence by 4 using the 2 options from the Books of Vile Darkness to make it be a 26. Again, upping anything that's intelligence-based and basically his DCs by 2 to a DC 24. He does have a fair amount of immunities to most conditions that would be detrimental: charmed, exhausted, frightened, paralyzed, poisoned, and stunned. He also has True Sight of 120 feet, so invisibilities can pretty much be useless because True Sight will cover the entire area, so he will be able to see everything. Resistance to cold, lightning, and necrotic, and immunity to poison, and again, non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. He does have 5 legendary resistances. I only ended up using 3 in my playthrough towards the end. He has his special dagger, Afterthought, which we'll talk about, and then you basically get into his stat block, right? So he either is going to use Flight of the Damned, Rotten Fate, or a spell. And then in addition, he can use 2 attacks with Afterthought. So we'll talk about Afterthought first, right? It's Dagger. It does a D4 plus 5 piercing plus 2d8 necrotic damage. And if the target is a creature, they're afflicted by entropic magic and they take 2d8 necrotic damage at the start of each of their turns. Once they take that damage, they can choose to make a Constitution saving throw DC 20, ending the effect if they succeed. But until they succeed on that saving throw, they cannot regain hit points. So he basically has the ability to stab them twice, do some damage, or possibly stab 2 characters depending on how far apart they are. And in doing so, it will basically give them static, recurring damage on their turn unless they succeed, but also shuts down any healing. You have Flight of the Damned. A torrent of flying spectral entities come out in a 120-foot cone. This cone, they must make a Constitution saving throw or take 8d8 necrotic damage and be frightened of Vecna for a minute. On a success, they take half damage and aren't frightened, and then again, they can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns. I only used this once, and then I found it to be less than stellar. It is an AoE, and it does hit everybody, but I found that Rotten Fate was my go-to move. Rotten Fate followed by 2 afterthought attacks, because Rotten Fate is you target a creature within 120 feet. They make a DC 20, I had again be 24 Constitution saving throw, or take 96 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half on a success. If they are killed, they rise as a zombie at the start of his next turn immediately after, and they act after him. The zombie's under their control. Now, he doesn't have a ton of spell casting. If you had them read the book, then his Dominate Monster spell is removed. Plane Shift, again, if he wants to leave, but I feel like that's a little... the party would be upset about that. He does have 2 dimension doors and 2 invisibilities and a scrying. Now, one thing that people brought up, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, is scrying has an interesting reaction with Dread Counterspell, where he can counterspell anything that the party is doing throughout the tower by just simply scrying on them. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then he has At Will. Animate Dead as an action. Chances are you're not going to really be able to do that. He has Detect Magic, a one that I missed because I kind of just skipped over this whole section of the At Will spells because I didn't really see anything that interested me. He does have Dispel Magic. So a reminder that he can use a spell and then also still to make 2 attacks. But I found, because he was taking a lot of damage from the party, that Rotten Fate dealing out 96 potential damage if you roll. I just ended up using the static numbers as opposed to rolling. Dealing out 96 damage to the party in one hit, hitting one person if they fail that save, and hitting them for 96 points of damage is huge. And that really shakes things up and gets people terrified of what's going to happen, as opposed to like wasting the opportunity to do 96 damage versus Dispel Magic. But you need to consider whether that damage is doing more to you than you need. We did have a Blade of Disaster in play, which ended up doing a ton of damage to Vecna because they crit on an 18, 19, or 20, and it does like 12d12 force damage or something. But he managed to survive a handful of turns. He also has Fly, Lightning Bolt, Mage Hand, and Prestidigitation. One of his big moves here, his basically recovery move, is Vile Teleport as a bonus action. He teleports along with any equipment he's wearing or carrying up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space he can see. When he does this, he can cause each creature of his choice within 15 feet of the destination to take 10 or 3d6 psychic damage. But more importantly, if any creature takes that damage of any kind, he gets 80 hit points back. So essentially, you can use a bonus action every turn to teleport. This could be an option to move away from the party to change up the battlefield situation. Or like a couple of times for me, he just teleported right next to the other side of the character he was fighting, for the purposes of being able to just get that 80 hit point heal. And I will tell you that throughout that, my party took him down to sub 50 hit points like 4 or 5 times. And he just healed back up the 80, and then they were just ticking back down the damage they had done before he would heal up again at the start of his turn. So that actually did a good job. But to my point from very much earlier, if the party has some sort of weapon that negates healing, that will basically negate this ability, and then he won't be able to recover, and as such, he will basically die very easily. And then lastly, probably the most controversial piece is his 3 reactions. And I do believe the purpose of giving him 3 reactions is to remove the usage of legendary actions. If you're familiar with the way legendary actions were, all monsters that are super, usually higher level, or things dragons and more impactful creatures, have things called legendary actions. The way the legendary actions work is that the monster basically has a number of legendary actions, whatever it ends up being, 3, 5, 2, 1, and it'll have a list of actions it can take. It could say like, for 1 legendary action, the monster can do this. For 2, it can do that. For all of them, it could do whatever, right? And the way legendary actions work is they happen at the end of somebody else's turn that is not Vecna. They would happen. The end of somebody else's turn, he can activate a legendary action, one of the abilities that he has. When it gets back to his turn, his legendary actions will reset. And he'll have whatever he has again going forward. Now, the thing that's nice about legendary actions is they trigger on the end of somebody else's turn. And why that's important is because you still get to do your whole turn before the legendary action would happen. The difference by giving him 3 reactions is a reaction trigger is immediately whenever the thing happens. So he has 2 options. He has Dread Counterspell, which is not a spell, therefore cannot be counterspelled via the counterspell spell. Said that a lot. It interrupts any spell of 4th level or lower. So it immediately is just done, dispelled, or counterspelled rather. If it is 5th level or higher, Vecna needs to make an intelligence check. Basically like anybody else would have to do when making a counterspell. No matter what the level of the spell is, the creature takes 3d6 psychic damage. So not only do you get to change the effect, but they also get to take psychic damage. So whatever the spell's level, the caster takes 3d6 psychic damage if the spell fails. So if you negate the spell via Dread Counterspell, they take 10 or 3d6 psychic damage. Now remind you, Vecna is starting with a +6, so he's going to make the DC, the most it'll be is 10 for a cantrip, 11 for a level 1 spell, or 19 for a level 9 spell. You are starting at a 6. Reminder that I bumped his intelligence score up by 4, so his intelligence would be starting at an 8. So all he would need to roll is a 3 to be able to, actually, I'm sorry, he would need to, he doesn't have to roll too high to be able to overcome higher level spell, which more often than not I was able to Dread Counterspell. Now, you do have 3 reactions, but you only have them once per turn. So if the player casts a spell and you counterspell it, and then they have access to like the sorcery and they use sorcery points to do something as a bonus action, you couldn't then Dread Counterspell the next one, only the initial one, because you're going to use it once per turn. Alternatively, you also have Fell Rebuke. In response to being hit by an attack, he utters a fell word dealing 3d6 necrotic damage to the attacker, and then he teleports 30 feet away. So between his bonus action teleport of 30 feet, landing next to somebody, possibly doing AoE damage, and then also healing, whenever he takes damage, he can use that as an opportunity to teleport 30 feet away. So his basic survival tactics are using legendary resistance to succeed on saving throws that he would normally fail, and then using things like Vile Teleport and Fell Rebuke to bamf around the battlefield and basically get himself away from creatures that have to be within a certain range to do things to him. For example, in mine, since we had a Blade of Disaster on the field, he used that primarily to get away so that the Blade of Disaster could only move so many feet, and then he could be beyond it so that it wouldn't be able to hit him on a given turn. Dread Counterspell, also very powerful, because you can essentially counterspell 3 spells in a turn, and more often than not, he was using that to shut down. I think the Bard didn't get to cast a singular spell because he shut that down. Another party member also mentioned that, and this was brought up in our discussion after the fact. Well, I guess we're just basically at the end here, so I guess we'll come over here. That because Vecna was right before them in the encounter, or in the initiative order, he could never cast a spell because Vecna would always get his reactions back on his turn, and then it was the following character's turn. Vecna could always counterspell them because he was ready for the next one because he had all of his counter spells back. So Vecna basically needed to make, then me as the DM needed to make the call, do I want to counterspell this or wait? That was the Artificer, happened to be the one right after me. So it was just like, it's not really worth counterspelling an Artificer's spell when we have a Bard and we have a Wizard. So I would rather get rid of their spells as opposed and like teleport away from the Barbarian. Now, I had mentioned at the start, we had somebody say Vecna's name. And it was right outside the tower. The Bard was going to basically discuss the story that happened as we were there. What happened was that also coincided with the chaos magic of of Limbo. So the party got hit by the damage from Limbo, and I had him specifically roll for take the damage, the psychic damage from saying Vecna's name. But he actually succeeded on the saving throw, so he wasn't affected by the fact that he needed to not be able to talk. So basically they're like, oh, that was weird. Maybe he just got hit with it for some reason. And then at the end, right when we got into the room and we rolled initiative to fight, I was doing Vecna's monologue where he says, you know, I'm inevitable. And he's about to get through his whole piece. Basically, you know, you won't live long enough. And then one of the characters goes, wait a minute, you're Vecna. Like, as a joke, like, haha, oh, that's who this is? And I was like, well, you said it in character, so go ahead and roll me. You take some psychic damage, which should have been 3d10. I only had it be 2d10 because I forgot. And then I said, and make me a saving throw. And he failed the saving throw. So the wizard, or sorry, not a wizard, he was a sorcerer. The sorcerer lost the ability to speak for 4 minutes. At the very, as I was introing Vecna's box text rather, before we rolled for initiative. So we just lost all verbal spell components for the sorcerer, who was basically unable to, would have been unable to do anything in that fight other than spells that didn't require verbal components. But it just so happened that that sorcerer had subtle spell, which allowed them to bypass the verbal and somatic components of spells to allow them to still function in the fight, which basically was the thing that was draining all of the sorcerer's sorcery points as we went along, because that was basically the only option that they had. Now, I will also say that the party benefited hugely from that short rest that they got right before they entered this encounter, because they were able to heal up. People who had short rest return mechanics got their short rest return mechanics and things back. And yeah, the only thing that kind of came up too is dread counterspell is you get counterspell when someone's casting a spell. Subtle spell, as most of you know, removes the verbal and somatic components from a spell. So in theory, if the spell has material components, Vecna would still recognize that the spell is being cast, I guess. The tricky part is the way material components are handled, right? You basically need to hold the material component in your hand or on your person, and then it says that that hand can be the same one used to do your somatic components. But you don't need to do the somatic components, and like the character's arcane focus was the staff that he had, which he was always holding the whole time, which in theory all you need to do is be holding the staff, which he was holding the staff to cast the spell. I guess in theory Vecna would have been able to notice the material component, possibly to be able to dread counterspell his spells. He was basically just using them to cast high-level fireballs to just do damage to Vecna, waiting on the Blade of Disaster to do a little bit more, if it was able to get to him. But yeah, it was interesting. I ended up allowing the subtle spells to basically negate Vecna's ability to counterspell those fireballs. But I will say part of it was this was the last encounter. The stream was going for over 4.5 hours at this point. So we were all kind of tired. I missed an opportunity to to counterspell the Greater Restoration, restoring the Barbarian's 7 strength back to him that it was reduced by. But, you know, again, that also, like, I knew that was kind of a thing I could do, but I was like, you know, I'm not going to do it right now because we're at the end of the encounter. But if this was fresh and everybody wasn't tired and we were, you know, it was like almost 2 o'clock in the morning. So we just ended up, I just didn't counterspell that, and I didn't counterspell the fireballs, but it's still a very good, fun, like 5-6 round fight, which was pretty awesome. And I did end up killing one of the characters, right? He ended up getting knocked unconscious by Vecna's, Rotten Fate ability, knocked him down and unconscious. So he was making death saving throws, and then I had Vecna use his teleport to teleport next to that character so that Vecna could deal damage to him, make him automatically fail a death saving throw, and gain 80 hit points. And then I was just basically made the call that, you know what, this is Vecna, and you're level 20 characters, and you're one of the 2 characters that can heal. So I had Vecna stab him with the dagger, and he went for the throat, and he killed the guy. So he actually ended up killing the bard in the fight. Again, the next turn he was brought back with a Revivify, but that's also something it doesn't give you the, like, stabbing somebody with this dagger or any of Vecna's abilities don't, like, immediately end their ability to come back, so they could just do that, use Revivify. But yeah, the fight was really fun. Again, the entire live stream is here on the channel. As I said, I'm going to clip out the discussion piece that we had at the end because I thought that was very interesting, although I did iterate a lot of it here. So the only thing I will say is be mindful, because it could be very annoying in that final fight if a character that maybe possibly uses, material, vocal component, verbal components, or needs to speak certain things for their abilities to work, if they happen to say Vecna somehow in the final combat, they can possibly lose their ability to speak for a D10 minutes. And realistically, most combats are going to end within less than 1 minute, so not having that is going to be pretty detrimental to that. But like I said, overall, we definitely had a good time playing it. Do I think there's some issues that could be resolved? Yes, I do think maps, like I said, are critical for this. They help a lot to explain what things are going, and they would definitely help in the grand scheme as the DM to be able to be like, oh, okay, there's a central staircase. Got it. But like I said, I will put a link in the description to these maps that were linked to me. Unfortunately, I got them this morning after we'd already ran the adventure, so I wasn't able to do that. But in the adventure, otherwise I would have. So anyway, that is my very extensive, lengthy review and insight from having run Don't Say Vecna for about an hour. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you all next time.